Can you believe that? There was a man who was poisoned, shot, beaten, and finally thrown into a frozen river, yet still didn't die immediately. A man whose actions, even those who wanted to kill him, began to fear. His name is Rasputin. Not a king, not a general, not a saint, but he controlled an entire empire from the shadows. Russia at the end of the 19th century, a vast, cold land filled with blind faith. In a remote, impoverished village called Pokrovskoye, where winter could kill a person in just a few hours, a child was born in 1869. Its name is Grigory. No one at the time thought that this child would become the nightmare of an entire dynasty. Grigory grew up like any other peasant child, uneducated, rude, and surrounded by alcohol, violence, and superstition. But there's something very strange. Ever since he was a child, people have said that his eyes were unusual. Those who look into it feel as if they are being drawn into something deeper, darker. That's not the look of a
look directly into the eyes of the person opposite him, without blinking. He learned when to be silent. And most importantly, he learned how to make others believe that he possessed power. Some stories began to spread, that Rasputin could cure diseases, that he can read minds, that he could ward off evil spirits. No one has proof. But in a society filled with fear and superstition, the evidence doesn't matter. The feeling is what ultimately matters. Rasputin was unlike other monks. He doesn't advise people to live a clean life. Opposite, he said that humans must fall in order to be saved. An extremely dangerous philosophy. And it's also extremely appealing, especially for wealthy people who are seeking forgiveness for their sins. That's when Rasputin began to enter another world, the world of power. 1903, Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg, the heart of the Russian Empire, a city where everything is decided by a few people: royal family, nobles, church, and the child. Rather, it's the gaze of someone observing and calculating. Young Rasputin was not a monk. He is a thief, a drunkard, a frequent troublemaker. Rumors circulated that he had participated in occult rituals, where sin was not forbidden, but encouraged. Some heretical sects in Russia at that time believed that, to draw near to God, one must go through sin. And Rasputin seems to have gone further than anyone else. Around the age of 28, an event occurred. Nobody knows exactly what it is. Some say he had a vision. Some people say he's possessed. Some say he simply wanted to escape his ordinary life. But from that moment on, Rasputin changed. He began going on pilgrimages, walked thousands of kilometers. No money, no food, no clear purpose. There's only one thing: belief, or something akin to belief. During those trips, Rasputin learned how to speak. It's not like speaking like a normal person. Rather, he spoke as if he knew something that others didn't know. He learned to
conspiracies were never written down. Initially, he was just a stranger, a farmer with a thick beard, dirty clothes, and a strong body odor. Nobody took him seriously. But Rasputin didn't come here to be respected. He came to infiltrate. He began approaching priests, theologians, and influential figures within the church. It's not about money, but by being different. He said things that others wouldn't dare say. He questioned things that others took for granted as true, and he did it all with an almost terrifying confidence. Gradually, people started to pay attention, not because he's saintly, but because he is hard to understand. And in a society full of rigid rules, an enigmatic person is always fascinating. But Rasputin didn't stop there. He understood that if he truly wanted power, he needs to get to the center, royal family. At this time, the Romanov family is hiding a secret that could bring down an entire empire. Prince Alexei, the heir to the throne. He
has hemophilia. A small wound could kill the boy. Queen Alexandra was devastated. She tried every doctor she could think of, all methods, all prayers, but nobody could help. And then Rasputin appeared. No one knows exactly what happened the first time he met the royal family, but the results are clear. The boy is getting better. Is it a miracle? Is it hypnosis? Is it a coincidence? Or is it something darker? The queen believed that Rasputin was the only one who could save her son, and that's all. That's enough. From an unknown farmer, Rasputin became someone who could enter the palace. No title needed, no position required. All it takes is trust. And that's when the real game begins. The game in which belief became a weapon, religion became a tool, and a man to become a shadow standing behind the throne. But power always comes with a price, and the higher you climb, the price is getting higher.
Manipulation of power, the suffocating atmosphere, and the escalating conspiracy. Part 2. The shadow behind the throne. If the first part was the story of someone rising from the mud into the palace, then this part is when he begins to turn the palace into his own stage. And the most terrifying thing about Rasputin wasn't that he cured the prince's illness, but after doing that, he made an entire dynasty believe they couldn't live without him. In St. Petersburg, rumors spread faster than the disease. A farmer from Siberia, uneducated, without title or status, yet he could enter and leave the imperial palace as if it were his own home. That was enough to enrage the nobility. But what happened next horrified them even more. Rasputin did not act like someone who had been given a favor. He acted as if he belonged there. It was as if that place needed him more than he needed it. This was Rasputin's first weapon, fearlessness. When faced with a high-ranking priest, he did not bow
Down like a devout believer. When speaking to nobles, he did not appear inferior like a peasant. When in the presence of the empress, he did not tremble like someone being granted an audience with a superior. Opposite, he maintained an unnervingly nonchalant demeanor. A kind of nonchalance that makes people start to wonder, is this guy really stupid? Or does he know exactly what he's doing? And it was in that very ambiguity that Rasputin created power. Because very often, people aren't afraid of what they understand. They are afraid of what they cannot read. Queen Alexandra was the first to completely fall into his orbit. She didn't see Rasputin as a monk. She saw him as the last thread connecting her to her son's life. This is extremely important, because once a mother believes that only one person can save her child, all logic crumbles. All warnings became meaningless. Any criticism is considered a personal attack, and Rasputin understood that very well. He didn't need to conquer
the entire court. He only needed to win over one person, Queen. And through her, he rose to a position that no one elected, no one appointed, but one that everyone had to be wary of. Tsar Nicholas II was not a tyrant of the strong type. He was a hesitant, conservative man, often torn between his responsibilities as emperor and the anxieties of a father. In a family where the queen was increasingly dependent on Rasputin and the crown prince was constantly in a fragile state, Nicholas gradually accepted this man's presence as an unpleasant but necessary thing. That's how many dangerous powers are formed, not by a coup, but through small, repeated concessions until no one remembers where the original boundary was. Rasputin began interfering in decisions. Initially, it was very sophisticated, a comment about someone, a suggestion on who to trust and who to avoid, a shake of the head when a minister is mentioned, an ambiguous statement like a prophecy about an unfaithful official.
The problem is that in the royal court, no one would take those things as mere gossip. Every word can kill a career. Every glance can be a verdict. And Rasputin, with his almost predatory instincts, realized this extremely quickly. He doesn't need to sign with a pen. He just needed to sow doubt. The rest, the royal court will handle itself on his behalf. From this point on, Russia began to witness an unprecedented phenomenon. Ministers, officials, even clergy were not only concerned with pleasing the Tsar, they also had to figure out what Rasputin was thinking. He may not sit on the state council, but he infiltrated every appointment, every piece of advice, every private conversation. Russian politics at that time gradually transformed into a labyrinth where the boundaries between faith, superstition, psychology, and power were blurred. And at the center of that labyrinth stood Rasputin, an unofficial figure, but extremely effective. What drove the nobility mad was that they
couldn't retaliate against him in the usual way. If Rasputin were an official, they could have brought him down. If he were a general, they could accuse him of treason. If he were an official cleric, they could investigate the church. But he doesn't fit into any particular structure. He is a living exception, a flesh and blood whole. And rigid systems of power are often very weak against those who don't play by the rules. The more prominent Rasputin became in the court, the more he cultivated a dualistic image. By day, he was a mysterious beggar, one touched by God. At night, according to numerous rumors and reports, he is a completely different person. Alcohol, depravity, party with women from all walks of life. These lengthy prayer sessions then devolved into clandestine meetings, religious rituals mixed with sexual themes. Some sources suggest that part of Rasputin's appeal stemmed from this very bizarre blend. He spoke of salvation while simultaneously wallowing in sin. He
appeared saintly while openly displaying depravity. To the average person, that's hypocrisy. But for those yearning for a distorted spiritual escape, it is alluring. Because Rasputin didn't say they had to be pure before they could be saved. He made them believe that even in the mud, they could still reach something sacred. And such a mindset is extremely dangerous. It corrupts people while still giving them a sense of justification. Rumors of black magic spread increasingly widely around Rasputin. Some say he can hypnotize women just with his gaze. Some people believe he used spells from Siberian heretical sects. Some claim he knew secret rituals, a blend of orthodoxy, folklore, lust, and blood. Not all of them have evidence, but the important thing is not whether it's real or fake. The important thing is that the entire empire began to believe that it could be true. And once the masses believe someone possesses supernatural powers, that person's influence grows far beyond any title.
Rasputin understood this principle instinctively. He doesn't need to correct himself. He didn't need confirmation either. He let the rumors spread on their own, because the most dangerous rumors are always those that remain unexplained. The press started getting involved. Opposition newspapers, anti-regime writers, those seeking to expose the corruption of the regime, considered Rasputin the perfect gift. He is an overly favorable symbol. A depraved peasant, his hands stained with alcohol and flesh, could come closer to the throne than many who were born into nobility. Nothing can tarnish the royal family's reputation faster than that. Every story about Rasputin that appeared in the newspapers was like a cut into the sacred image of the Romanov dynasty. And the unfortunate thing is that many of those stories, however embellished, are still based on the core truth that he really did have influence. The Tsar could deny the scandal, but he couldn't deny that Rasputin was there, right?
In the heart of power. Within the royal court, hatred began to solidify into conspiracy. The Grand Dukes viewed him as a disgrace to the royal bloodline. Many aristocratic ladies were both disgusted and obsessed by him. Some bishops wanted to expel him from religious influence. Politicians viewed him as the cause of the state's decline. But anyone who dared to act would run into Rasputin's strongest wall, the Queen's absolute faith. Alexandra wasn't just protecting him. She also viewed the attacks against Rasputin as a conspiracy against her family, against the crown prince, and against God's will. At this point, any attacks on Rasputin were no longer purely political. It turned into psychological warfare. To bring him down,
they had to break the faith of a desperate mother, and that's almost impossible. One of Rasputin's most terrifying qualities is his ability to appear at precisely the moment of crisis. Whenever Alexei experienced severe pain or bleeding, the atmosphere in the
palace instantly turned hellish. The doctor was helpless. The servants were in a panic. The empress was devastated. And then Rasputin was summoned. Sometimes he comes in person. Sometimes they just send a telegram. There were times when, after he prayed or asked for the boy to be left alone, Alexei's condition actually improved. Today, many historians believe this can be explained by psychological factors, by discontinuing incorrect treatments, such as aspirin use, or simply by coincidence with the course of the disease. But at that time, in a mother's eyes, this wasn't a medical explanation. This is a miracle. And each such miracle added another nail to the coffin of reason within the palace. Rasputin began receiving letters of appeal from all over the world. People asked him to cure their illnesses. Ask him to intervene so you can get a promotion. Please ask him to help your relative escape punishment. Please ask him to bless the marriage. Ask him to curse his opponent. His name slipped beyond the confines of the court and became a mass phenomenon. Half of Russia considers him a saint. The other half saw him as a demon. But both sides have one thing in common. No one can ignore him anymore. That was Rasputin's real victory. Not being loved, nor was he respected. Rather, it has become something that cannot be ignored. Simultaneously, his sexual scandals and ostentatious displays became increasingly blatant. There are testimonies that he received women in his home with prayer sessions and then led them into a strange state of submission. Some say he touched them as if bestowing a blessing. Others claim it is a form of spiritual coercion disguised as religious belief. Regardless of the extent of the truth, one thing is fairly certain. Rasputin knew how to exploit his ambiguous power over the minds of others very effectively. He makes the person opposite him feel chosen, understood, forgiven, and promised something greater than themselves. That's the mechanism, used by many dangerous manipulators throughout history. They didn't start with orders. They begin by making the victim feel special. But the more people told stories about him, the more distorted the portrait of Rasputin became. In one room, he was the savior praying for the prince. In another room, he was a drunken devil groping women. In Alexandra's eyes, he was a man sent by God. In the eyes of the nobility, he was a tumor eating away at the heart of the empire. In the eyes of the poor, he was proof that a man from the mud could still climb into the palace. In the eyes of the press, he was a weapon that could shake the throne. And in his own eyes, perhaps Rasputin had begun to believe that he was truly invincible. This is an extremely dangerous moment, because when a manipulator lives long enough in success, he often makes a fatal mistake, equating the ability to exert influence with immortality. By the early 1910s, Rasputin was no longer a court secret. He is an open wound in the face of Russia. Every political crisis, every bizarre appointment, every incomprehensible royal decision, his name is always brought up. Sometimes there is a basis for it, sometimes not. But social perceptions had already taken shape. If the empire is rotting, then Rasputin is the first stench that everyone can smell. And when a person becomes a symbol of corruption, their fate is practically sealed. It's not a matter of whether he'll be attacked or not, but who will strike first. Then war came, and that's when things went from dangerous to deadly. The war not only exposed the weaknesses of the Russian state, it also made Rasputin's presence unbearable. Because when the country was bleeding on the battlefield, the fact that a figure like him was still whispering in the Queen's ear was no longer a scandal. It was considered a national crime. From here, the whispers in the palace corridors would turn into bloody plans. Those who once despised him will begin to believe that there is only one way to save the throne: kill Rasputin. There are deaths that are planned as a mission,
And there are deaths that are like a ritual. The night Rasputin was assassinated was a blend of both. Late 1916, Russia is bleeding. World War I devastated the economy. Soldiers died on the battlefield. People in the city are starving. Faith in the Tsar had almost completely vanished. And at the heart of it all, the name Rasputin remains a source of shame. It's no longer just a rumor. It's no longer a scandal. He became a symbol of decay. In the eyes of a group of high-ranking nobles, the matter was all too clear. The empire could not be saved if Rasputin were still alive. The leader of this group is Prince Felix Yusupov, rich, power, and despair. Beside him was Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a man of royal blood, along with a number of politicians and officers. These are not professional killers. They are people who believe they are doing the right thing, and it was that very belief
that made their plan even more dangerous. They didn't just want to kill Rasputin. They want to get rid of him, turn that name into an end, a statement, a shock big enough to cleanse the court. The plan was set up as a perfect trap. Location, Yusupov's Moika Palace, a secluded place, out of the public eye, elegant enough not to arouse suspicion. Allure, an invitation. Rasputin was invited to meet Yusupov's wife, a woman rumored to be beautiful and curious about him. For Rasputin, this was nothing unusual. He was used to aristocratic women seeking him out of trust, curiosity, or other reasons difficult to name. That night, it was so cold that the air felt like it was cutting into your skin. Snow blankets the streets of St. Petersburg, a city that is silent but far from peaceful. Rasputin entered the palace, no bodyguards, without a doubt. Or maybe he suspected it but didn't care. That's one of the biggest mysteries about him. Did Rasputin believe he was unkillable? He
was led down to the basement. A small, warm room was prepared. Cake, wine. The lights were soft, an almost intimate setting. Absolutely perfect. But above that room, these are the men who are waiting. Listen, monitor, and tighten your grip on the gun. Yusupov sat opposite Rasputin. Try to stay calm. Try to talk as if nothing happened. Meanwhile, his heart was beating so fast it was almost painful. Rasputin ate the cake, drank alcohol, slowly. No rush. It was as if he had the whole night. And this is where the plan begins. There was poison in the cake and the wine, a quantity sufficient to kill many people, something that should have ended everything in a few minutes. But nothing happened. Rasputin continued to eat, keep drinking, continue the conversation. It even seemed more cheerful. Up above, the conspirators began to panic. This was not part of the plan. There is no clear plan B. There is only one simple assumption. Poison will solve everything. But it failed. In the basement room, the atmosphere began to change. Yusupov looked at Rasputin. Longer, more details. And for the first time that night, he felt something akin to fear. There's no need to fear being discovered. It's the person sitting right in front of me that I'm afraid of. Rasputin looked back. That look in his eyes. Those eyes, people once said, didn't look human. Don't panic. Without a doubt. There was only a calm, almost mocking. As if he knew. Yusupov couldn't take it anymore. He asked permission to leave the room, go upstairs, where others are waiting in tension. He's still alive. No one said anything for a few seconds, because nobody wants to be the first to admit that the plan has failed. Then they made a decision. If the poison doesn't kill him, then they will use a more reliable method. Yusupov returned to the basement. He was holding a gun. Rasputin is still there. Sit. Wait. There are moments in history that last longer than usual. This
moment
is one of them. Yusupov approached. He said a few things. He later recounted them, but no one is sure what was true. Then he raised his gun. Shoot. The bullet hit Rasputin. He fell down, motionless. Blood spread across the floor. This time, they believe it's all over. The conspirators are down. Look at the corpse. A sigh of relief. Some people almost collapsed with relief. They just killed the most dangerous man in Russia. Or so they think. Yusupov, in a decision that even he himself could not explain later, go back to the room, alone. He wanted to be sure. Or perhaps he wanted to see the face of the man he had just killed again. The room was silent. Rasputin was lying there, unmoved. Yusupov bent down. And then Rasputin's eyes opened. Not gradually, not weak, but it's turned on. He stared directly at Yusupov. That moment has gone down in history as a nightmare, because everything that should have ended has come back. Rasputin jumped up.
Don't yell. No chaos. As if death had just been denied. He rushed towards the door. Yusupov is alone. Footsteps. The sound of a door. The sound of someone running. The accomplices panicked. One person pulled out a gun. Keep shooting. Second broadcast. Third broadcast. Rasputin was shot. Fall. Then, he kept trying to crawl. There are accounts that say he tried to run out into the yard. Other accounts say he was merely dragging his body. But they all agreed on one thing. He didn't die immediately. And that's what shattered the spirits of those who killed him. They no longer felt like they were dealing with a human being. It's something that refuses to follow normal rules. Finally, they beat him up. Pinioned. Rasputin's body was now almost completely unresponsive. Or perhaps, he had exhausted all his strength. Or maybe, he's still watching them. Nobody is sure. They took him outside. The night was bitterly cold. The Neva River is partially frozen. An ice hole has been prepared. There was no ceremony, no final words. Only action matters. They threw Rasputin into the water. His body vanished into the darkness, beneath the ice, in water so cold it could kill a person in a matter of minutes. Everything is over. Or at least that's what they want to believe. A few days later, Rasputin's body was found. And then a detail emerged. One detail makes this story no longer just an ordinary assassination. There are indications that there is fluid in his lungs. What does that mean? That means when someone is thrown into the river, Rasputin, he is still alive. Just a few months after that night, the Russian Empire began to crumble. Not because of a bullet. It wasn't because of a knife. But that's because trust had been depleted a long time before that. People don't revolt just because they're hungry. They revolted because they no longer trusted their leader. And in their eyes, the image of the Tsar
was no longer a symbol of sacred power, but he was a weak man, manipulated by someone they considered a devil. Rasputin, even after his death, continues to exist as an indictment, a living testament, or rather, a dead testament, that the Romanov court allowed something distorted to infiltrate the center of power. February 1917. The revolution broke out. Nicholas II abdicated. A dynasty that lasted over 300 years ended in chaos. But the tragedy didn't end there. A year later, the royal family was imprisoned. Then, on another dark night, there was no ceremony, there was no glory, there is no salvation. They were executed by firing squad. All, both the Tsar and the Empress, Queen, the children. Some people later said,
If Rasputin had never appeared, things could have been different. But that's a question without an answer, because Rasputin wasn't the only cause. He is the symptom. It is the result of a system that has rotted from the inside, a system that is too rigid to